we're really seeking to answer the question, who am I becoming? What am I being produced into? So what am I, as I participate in various things throughout my life, what is it that these things are making me into? And we've been walking through some of these kind of various habits like scripture reading and prayer, the habit of giving, just simply kind of walking through and saying, okay, if we're a people saying that we're committed to the way of Jesus, then what does actual conformity to Christ look like? Like, what does it actually look like? Not with the thought and the idea that we'll ever reach kind of perfection and our life will completely, absolutely look like Jesus, but how do we look at his life and begin to kind of mimic the way in which that he lived? Not just his morality, but his rhythm and his routine. How was it that he was able to live in such a way that he lived? One of the things, before we get into this idea of the habit of Sabbath, and I love Anna's story, but one of the things hopefully that you're doing is we're kind of working our way through this series. And if you're new with us this morning, I can't summarize the whole thing, but let me just basically say this. Hopefully you're thinking through the thought of, okay, as I'm participating in these things, because a lot of spiritual formation is not just developing habits that are good, but it's also a significant amount of deformation. Now, what I mean by that is what you'll find is that as you're kind of participating in scripture reading, as you're participating in a habit of prayer, as you're participating in a habit of giving, as you're participating in a habit of Sabbath, what will happen is more and more there will be a type of clarity that comes kind of around you that says, oh, wow, this thing that I'm participating in is making me into something I do not like. And there will be a significant amount of work that you'll have to put in to say, hey, I actually need to tear away from certain things so that I can look more like Jesus. So participation, yes, that's what we're going to talk a lot about. But it's also, there's participation there, but there's also this sense of like tearing away and pulling back from the things that are forming you in a way that's ultimately not for your good. We said spiritual formation, if we're talking about kind of a base level, spiritual formation, base level definition, is the process of being conformed into the image of Jesus for the sake of others. So spiritual formation, the process of being conformed, so that's the end goal, into the image of Jesus for the sake of others. And so today, this morning, I want to look at Sabbath. Now, let me say this before we get in. There are a lot of these habits are true for all people at all times, right? And it's not as if any of these habits I would say, hey, we're people that don't need these, right? Because these were all things that Jesus was embracing, that we're placing into his rhythm, and so we do need it. We need all of these things. But I do want to be very, I do want to make it very clear that as I was thinking about the habits, and we couldn't cover them all on a Sunday morning, but I was absolutely adamant that the habit of Sabbath would be one that we would talk about. That like in our context, so whether you're in school or whether you work full-time, right? In our context, developing a habit of Sabbath will be one of the most challenging things. It'll be two things. It'll be one of the most challenging things that you can do, because all of us here will be like, I'm too busy. I've got too much going on. My responsibilities at work, my responsibilities at school, can't possibly do it. Right? We'll talk to that. You'll have that. But on the other end of the spectrum, it'll also, if you embrace it, it'll be the most life-giving thing that you can embrace as you're embracing the habits, if you can get it. If you can kind of get around this idea of Sabbath. A.J. Sabota says this. He says, the Sabbath is a gift we do not know how to receive. In a world of doing, going, producing, we have no use for a gift that invites us to stop. That is the original gift, a gift of rest. You see, if you fail to embrace Sabbath, I firmly believe that if you fail to embrace Sabbath, you will not experience a life with God and neighbor that is characterized by joy, freedom, and deep intimacy. It's not possible. Okay, so here are the three things we're going to look at. We're just going to look at what is the Sabbath. Some of you are like, please define it. I need some lineup here. So what is the Sabbath? Why is it important? And how will we do it? These are the three things we're going after. What is the Sabbath? Why is it important? And how do we do it? Okay, so let's look at what the Sabbath is. So in Genesis chapter 2, 1 through 3, if you have a Bible, you can turn there. But in Genesis 2, 1 through 3, let me read this, and then we'll kind of set the context of what's going on. So this is what happens, Genesis 2, 1 through 3. It says, so the heavens and the earth and everything in them were completed. So on the seventh day, God had completed his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all of his work that he had done. Verse 3, God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy. We'll come back to that. Blessed the seventh day, declared it holy, for on it he rested from all of his work, from all of his work. Okay, so here's what we see. The Genesis 1 and 2 kind of gives us a creation story. If you're familiar with the Bible at all or you grew up in church, you kind of got that, right? This is the creation story. And so what we see in Genesis 1 is that God creates all things by his creative power. And so day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, he's doing all these various kind of days of creation. And then Genesis chapter 2, 1 through 3 says that at the seventh day, it says God rested. Literally, that Hebrew word is Shabbat. It just means to cease, to stop. It literally means to cease and to stop. And so Genesis chapter 2 says, after God had done all of these things, now he decides to take a rest. Let me give you the definition, base level definition. The Sabbath is the ancient practice. I say ancient because it's been around forever, right? We've kind of lost it a little bit, but it's been around forever. The Sabbath is an ancient practice of stopping from work to embrace intentional rest and worship. Okay, so why is this important? And you heard Anna mention this in her story a bit about being consumed by her schooling. So in America, we in America statistically work more than any nation in the world. It is just who we are. I actually read a Wired magazine article on the Japanese culture of overwork. Have you heard of this before? So basically, the Japanese have a word that means it basically means death by overwork. It's karoshi. If you're Japanese, please correct me later. It's karoshi, and it essentially means like death by overwork. Now, this really came to light kind of in the 1990s. You had a lot of kind of middle to upper class Japanese men that were dying from overwork. They were just kind of falling out over from the stress of their work. You can Google it. There's all these kind of stories that are out there. But inside of this article that I was reading, it talked about a landmark study in the World Health Organization. They did a study, and this is what they found. This is from, they gathered all this data from 2016. This is a new article, but this is from 2016. And it was kind of this landmark study. It found this. It found that in 2016, 745,000 people died from stroke or heart disease as a direct result of having worked at least 55 hours a week. 745,000 people died of stroke or heart disease connected to and related to working for 55 hours. It was the first time on a global scale that long hours at work, this is what they said, that long hours at work have been established as responsible for about 1/3 of all deaths from overwork. If you're looking at the numbers, so Americans work more hours by year. We work 137 more hours than the Japanese by year. We work 260 more hours a year than the British. And then we work 499 hours more than the French, which is not surprising. No, that wasn't a shot. Okay. COVID, in many ways, has really only exacerbated the problem for many people. Now there's this idea of work from home. Now you can pull up the studies and the surveys, and they kind of say whatever you want them to say, right? Some is like production is up. Some say production is down, right? Some say morale is up. Some say morale is down. The reality across the board is that the boundaries between work and home are now broken. And there's a sense in which it's made things even worse. I mean, I talk to guys and they're like, yeah, it just seems like now that I work from home, my boss just assumes I can always work. Like my computer and my desk is there. I'm not clocking in and clocking out. And so it's just like, hey, he sends me a quick email or whatever, a Slack or whatever. And he's like, hey, I need you to do this thing. And it's only made this problem of overwork even more so of an issue. Now, here's the problem. the need to cease, this is what we're going to see. The need to cease from our work is hardwired inside of us. Like it's deeply ingrained in us. This is why we're seeing problems from overwork, because it's deeply a part of who we are. I mean, the result of having what I would say non-Sabbath lives, which I think we could characterize that as 2022, is having non-Sabbath lives. The result of that is that we've essentially become the most emotionally exhausted, psychologically overworked, and spiritually now malnourished people on the face of the earth. This is the result of the work. Now, God actually is going to instruct the Israelites to rest because he knows this. So Exodus 20, 8 through 11, this is what we saw earlier. This is a part of the commandments that God gives his people. And so he says to them in Exodus 20, 8 and 11, says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You're to labor for 6 days, do all of your work. But on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, your resident alien who's within your city gates. I mean, this is like so countercultural. Verse 11, for the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days. And then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. Now, here's what's interesting. If you go back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 3, I'll read it for you, so you don't have to turn there. But it said, God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, for on it he rested from all of his work of creation. Okay. This is actually the first time that we see the Hebrew word for holy put onto something, actually communicated in the scriptures. The first time we've seen it. Now, let's think about that for a second. So in Genesis 2, verse 3, it says he blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, set apart. That's what holy means. It means to be set apart, different than, right? So think about that. God didn't say something's holy that was created. It wasn't like this animal is holy, right? He didn't say these people are holy. Like it wasn't a tangible kind of created thing that God has established as holy or as set apart. What God set apart as holy, because think about the kind of the ripple effect of this, is God said, what is holy? He said, time is holy. This day is holy. It's important. It should be set apart. It should be set apart. Okay, so that passage is probably the most well-known passage on Sabbath. But actually in Exodus 16, so when God gave them the Ten Commandments, when he gave the commandments to Moses at Mount Sinai, and said, keep the Sabbath holy. This actually wasn't the first time that they had heard about the Sabbath, and that they had heard about the command of the Sabbath. Exodus 16, 21. This is 21 through 26. Listen, this is super fascinating. It says they gathered every morning. Well, let me set it up so that you have it. So here's what happened. So the Israelites left Egypt. Maybe you've seen the movie. They left Egypt, right? And they get out of there and they're running on adrenaline. They've come through the Red Sea. It's just an incredible thing, right? And so there's like, oh, we were under the oppressive arm of Pharaoh, and now we're out of his system. We're out of his schedule. We're out of his rhythm. Like we no longer have to kind of follow his rules and regulation. We're outside of his kingdom. And they were celebrating that. And then they kind of get into the wilderness, right? Now think about if you're a logistic person, think about the logistic nightmare that is taking all these people, Like we kind of watch it or we think about it and you're like this is a nightmare, right? So they get out into the wilderness and what do they realize? We're not in Pharaoh's system anymore. We're not in his rhythm anymore. What are we going to do, right? They start to grumble and complain to Moses. So this is what God says. God says, okay, I'm your God, so I'm going to take care of you, right? I'm going to take care of you. He said, this is what's going to happen. Every morning, dew's going to come on the ground. It's weird, but every morning, dew's going to come on the ground. It's when it goes away, there will be something on the ground that they called manna. Manna in Hebrew just means what? They're like, what is that? All right, so he said, so every morning, what I want you to do is I want you to collect this on the ground. It's going to be food for you each day. So you have a certain amount that you're going to collect that I want you to take, and this is going to take care of you and nourish you because I'm the Lord your God. Okay, Exodus 16, 21. Listen to this. Verse 20, it says, they gathered it every morning. Each gathered as much as he needed to eat, but when the sun grew hot, it melted. It went away. Verse 22. On the sixth day, they gather twice as much as food. Okay, so here it is. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they gather just kind of the normal amount that they're allotted to gather. Then they get to the sixth day, and verse 22 says, on the sixth day, they gather twice as much food, 4 quarts apiece, and all the leaders of the community came and reported this to Moses. He told them, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake, boil what you want to boil, and set aside everything left over to be kept until morning. So they set it aside until morning as Moses commanded, and it didn't stink or have maggots in it. That's crucial. Verse 25, eat it today, Moses said, because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you won't find any in the field. Verse 26, for 6 days you will gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none. Okay, this is pre-10 Commandments. So God, from the very beginning, has said to them, like when he gave Moses at Mount Sinai, like they already knew the Sabbath. They already understood that on the seventh day, God had given them a day as rest, a day of complete rest, a day to stop. And so they created this system of gathering food. God will, essentially says like God will take care of you. Gather enough for the Sabbath day, God will take care of you, right? It will bless you. There's something there, right? Chick-fil-A. All right, here we go. Why do we need? So let's talk about it. Why do we need the Sabbath? There's essentially 3 reasons why we need the Sabbath. Here's the 3 reasons why we need it. First reason, number 1, it was given to us for our flourishing. God has given us the Sabbath rest for our flourishing. This is for spiritual, physical, and mental rest. The great theologian Winnie the Pooh states it correctly. Don't underestimate the value of doing nothing, of just going along, listening to all the things you can't hear and not bothering. In 1793, France, in an effort to increase human productivity and to essentially de-Christianize the calendar, they modified a 7 workday week to a 10 workday week. They made new clocks that they invented to reflect the revised week. They just thought, hey, let's move this thing from 7 days to 10 days of work. How do you think that went? The experiment radically failed. Suicide rates skyrocketed, people burned out, and production decreased. Well, why did that happen? Well, it happened because humans were not made to work 9 days and to rest only 1 in the week. They were made to work 6 days and rest 1. You see, the 7-day rhythm is sacred. It's holy. It is a time in which God has set apart for the flourishing of his people and for humanity. When we begin to mess with these things, it's not for our health. There's 3 types of fatigues that we feel. There's the fatigue of the body, right? So that's no sleep. You're living on Red Bull and coffee and flat whites. There's the fatigue of the mind, where you're bombarded with information that you can't possibly absorb all the time. And then there's fatigue of the soul, where you have little margin to be with God. And all of us, in various ways, feel this type of fatigue. And when we run as if we're not human, these things begin to increase. You see, work tends to work itself out this way, right? Work for a lot of people falls into these 2 categories. Work is either an obsession to you or an oppression to you. Work as an obsession, right? So you are what you do. So you work because that's how you get value as an individual. You study, get the grades, whatever you're kind of shooting for, because that's where you get value as an individual. It is an obsession for you. Now, let me be super transparent. I tend to fall more into this category. Like I love what I do. I love it. Absolutely. Like I thoroughly enjoy it. And so if I'm prone to do anything, I'm prone to overwork. That's just what it is, right? That's why a wife and kids are a gift, right? All right, so your identity is rooted in it. On the other end of the spectrum, there's a very real reality that work is oppressive. You got to work to eat. You got to work to pay rent. That's just reality. Just is for a lot of people. For more people than less, that's reality. That work is oppressive. And so I do want to say that this is nuanced. This is difficult. This is hard. And no matter kind of where you fall on that, like we can have a conversation on both of those, right? On work as obsession or work as oppression. Either one, you can't run as an individual that doesn't need rest. It's just not possible. No matter where you kind of fall into this category, to rest is to be human. This idea of Sabbath rest is so deeply ingrained in us. It actually is ingrained in creation. So you can see this in Exodus 23, but basically God instructs the Israelites to do what? Do you know this? He tells them to work and cultivate the ground for 6 years. And then on the 7th year, he says what? Let it rest. Let it rest. Do you see how, like, at a deep level, I mean, we don't have time to get into all the ramifications of our overfarming and everything else we got going on. But let's just say this, that this idea of 6 days, 7th day rest is deeply ingrained into the DNA of creation. This is what we see over and over again. Dana Butler Bass says this, drawing the connection between God's rhythm and ours. She says this: our bodies move to a rhythm of work and rest that follows the rhythm originally strummed by God on the waters of creation. As God worked, so shall we. As God rested, so shall we. Working and resting, we who are human are in the image of God. That's how we flourish. Second thing, so why it's important to embrace the habit of Sabbath. The first reason is because it's for your flourishing. The second reason is because it's commanded by God. I want you to look back. So in Exodus 16, remember the Exodus 16 where the manna came and they were collecting the certain amount that they needed for the 6th day for their care. Well, in Exodus 16, when I go back there, because there's something interesting happens. So Exodus 16:24 says, so they set aside the food from the 6th day until the morning on the 7th, as Moses commanded, and it didn't stink or have maggots in it. Eat it today, Moses said, right? Verse 26, for 6 days you'll gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. Okay, verse 27, let's kick down and see what happens. This actually makes me feel better. All right, verse 27. It says, yet on the 7th day, some of the people went out to gather, but they did not find any. Verse 28. Then the Lord said to Moses, Moses always gets it on behalf of the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will you refuse to keep my commands and instructions? Understand that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the 6th day, he will give you 2 days worth of bread. Each of you stay where you are. No one is to leave his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. Do you see that? German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer once wrote that with God, an imperative is an indicative. That what God tells you to do, you do. You do. H. Farmer once said, if you go against the grain of the universe, you get splinters. God has commanded it. His judgment is his love, right? Only a deity, only a bad deity would celebrate and enable habits that lead to death of his creation, right? Like God wouldn't call what is bad good and what is good bad, would he? So if he's saying that the 7th day, a day of rest, is good, then it's good. If he's implying in that to work continuously and never take a break, right, is bad, then it's bad. It is a commandment by God given to us from God over and over and over again. Third thing, so it's for our flourishing. It's commanded by God. Third thing, it's the clearest picture of the gospel of grace. It's the clearest picture. The developing a habit of Sabbath, embracing the Sabbath is the clearest picture of the gospel of grace. Here's what you have to understand. So when God gave them that command, and when he told them in Exodus 16 to rest on the 7th day, where were they coming out of? They were coming out of what? 400 years of slavery. Their primary, hear this, their primary identity was an identity rooted in their work, what they produce. Like these 400 years of forced labor had done what? It had dehumanized them. It had deformed the image of God inside of them. It had said something about them that wasn't true. And so God, knowing people, knowing the rhythms that we create, right? Knowing just even psychologically how we kind of produce into these habits and rhythms, right? He says to a people who've been walking in 400 years of slavery, he says to them, hey, you're not primarily what you do, you're primarily who you're loved by. And you're loved by me. So you're going to work 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but on that seventh day, you rest. You stop. You no longer work because you're loved by me. See that? Like every Sabbath that we take, every time we take a Sabbath, it is this kind of mini picture of the gospel. That we are loved by God, that we can actually stop and rest and not accomplish or produce anything, and God still love us. This is what we see. The overarching story of the Bible is not about the performance of God's people, but it's about the continual compassion, love, grace, and forgiveness of God. And the Sabbath is just a recognition of that. Look at what Jesus said. In Jesus' ministry, as Jesus tends to do, so in Jesus' day, the Sabbath this will be shocking to you. The people in Jesus' day, the religious elite, had actually turned the Sabbath into a legalistic work. I know that's shocking. And we would distort something. And so basically this is what they did. They said, okay, the Sabbath is to be holy, you can't work. And so they put all of these laws around it. They essentially built all of these fences around it because they didn't want to get anywhere close to it, right? And the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath was a distinctly Jewish thing in the Roman culture in which they were operating in which Jesus was operating in. But it had become really a type of brag, a type of like, oh, this is how I keep the Sabbath. I don't do anything. I'm not going to do any type of work, right? This is what they did. And so Jesus is going with his these men and women that are following him. They're going through the field. This is what Mark 2 tells us. And they're picking some grain and they're eating the grain. And the religious elite see this and they're like, oh, hey, that's work, right? Because how do you define work? This is where it gets it's a little tricky, right? Like, how do you define what work is? And so they're like, oh, that's wrong. They're working on the Sabbath. Now, Jesus, we don't have time to get in the story, but Jesus gives them a story about King David. It's a story that they would have understood, that they got, that made sense to them. And then listen how he ends this interaction. I love what Jesus does here. This is Mark chapter 2, 27 and 28. So he tells them this story, and then it says this. Then he told them, the Sabbath was made for man. Anna mentioned this. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So he's like, Sabbath is actually given to man and woman as a gift for them. And then 28, he levels up, which is what Jesus should do. Verse 28, so then, the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath. Now, if you read on down from that in Mark chapter 3, he goes into the temple, the synagogue, because Jesus loves doing this stuff. And it's on the Sabbath day. There's a guy who is crippled, and Jesus heals him. The majority of Jesus' miracles happen on the Sabbath. There's something unique tied about the Sabbath or the restorative nature of the Sabbath, even in Jesus' ministry. And so he heals this man and essentially is following up and saying, this is what Jesus is doing. He's essentially saying, I'm the Lord of rest. Rest comes through me. I'm the source of the deep rest that you're looking for. I am the Sabbath. This kind of one day a week rest is really just an image, a picture of a kind of a deep divine rest of God that I'm the source of. They're like, are you sure he's saying that? I'm not really sure. Mark 11, 28, 30. I'm glad you asked. Listen what he says. You're probably familiar with this verse. Come to me, Jesus says this, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take up my yoke and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart. You will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You see, Jesus didn't do away with the Sabbath. He put it in its proper place. For some of you, the only way you're going to like you could walk out of here, you could say, you know what, I'm going to embrace this 6 day of work, 7 day Sabbath. I'm going to kind of work this thing in my rhythm. Maybe some of you already have it. But if you haven't given your life to Christ, like if you haven't seen him as Lord, you will not experience the deep type of rest that Jesus wants you to experience. All you'll do is just put on the kind of the yoke of Sabbath. And Jesus says, man, real rest comes through me. I am the Lord. If you want rest, you find it in me. Okay, so how do we do it? How do we do this? Final thought here. We put a graphic together. Hopefully this will be helpful. Essentially, there's 4 elements that are involved in a day of Sabbath. There's stop, rest, delight, and worship. Stop, rest, delight, and worship. I put a little arrow there because it's kind of like just all throughout the day, right? You got to embrace it. You're like, okay, I'm working. Yeah, I got to stop. Stop, rest, worship, and delight. Okay, stop, number 1. You should be, if you're embracing the habit of Sabbath, you should be stopping your work. Honestly, Sabbath is a great reminder that my work is never done. It's a great reminder. I never get to my Sabbath day and think, I answered all the emails, I answered all the phone calls, I answered all the texts. It just never happens. Like I just always feel a need to do something else. There's just all of us, right? All of us could just keep going. Another assignment to do, to get ahead of, whatever. That wasn't me in school, but some people work that way. Always. Let me give you this picture. So my wife and I love the Great British Bake Off. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, man. It's like, dude, give me some pad thai. You know what I mean? Like a good drink. I'm just like post up. All right, so here's what happens. If you've never seen the Great British Bake Off, you should watch it. But anyway, so you know when you're watching the show, it's a cooking show. Some of you are like, what are you talking about? It's a cooking show. And so what happens is they all get a task, right, that needs to happen. And if you're watching it, what happens, right? They get the task, they start doing it, and all of them are timed. They're all timed. So you're watching, they always make it way more dramatic than it probably really is. But what's happening is they're like, okay, you have 10 minutes left. You have 10 minutes left. And you have, but they say it funnier than that. And then you have, 1 minute left or whatever. And they're like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, and so they're like, you can see them, the camera shots on them and they're like cleaning everything up and they're kind of putting all things together. And it's got this really suspenseful, and they're like, gets to one, and what they do, they're like, back up. Right? You've seen the show before, maybe it's something else. They back up. I think that's a great picture. Like, I think it would do our souls well for us if we got to Sabbath and we just threw our hands up and we just said, it's not complete. I could do more, but time's up. I'm stopping. This is what it means to embrace the Sabbath. Someone asked me the other day, they don't live here in Boston, so people are always like terrified and fascinated by this place. And so they were like, hey, what's the number one thing that people deal with in Boston? And I just said, man, honestly, in my opinion, identity is performative. You are what you do here. You are what you know. You are how much you make. You are your position at work. You are how many degrees that you have. You are what you do. Identity is performative. This is what we kind of deal with here in this place. You heard Anna kind of mention it in her story that she had kind of over-identified with her schedule and her work and what she was doing. The Sabbath is just a wonderful opportunity for us to say, I'm not primarily what I do. I'm not. It's a witness to the world around us that we're different people. Okay, I got to move on. That's stop. Second thing is rest. Dallas Willard said, busyness is the greatest enemy of the spiritual life. Barbara Brown Taylor says this, we've made an idol of exhaustion. The only time we know we have done enough is when we're running on empty and with the ones we love the most are the ones that we see the least. If you're actually going to embrace a day of rest, you will have to come at it hard. Like, it will take work. It'll take work. Now, the work will primarily have to do with what? Primarily the technology in your life, probably, right? Like it's like our cell phones are like have to be the most helpful and destructive things to exist. And it'll take work. Like if you're going to experience a real type of work, you're going to have to a real type of rest. You're going to have to wage war against these things. Mark Buchanan beautifully says this. He says the rest of God, the rest that God gladly gives, so that we might discover that part of God we're missing. It's not a reward for finishing. It is not a bonus for work well done. It's sheer gift. It is a stop work order in the midst of work that's never completed and never polished. Sabbath is not the break we're allotted at the tail end of completing all of our tasks and chores, the fulfillment of all of our obligations. It's the rest we take smack dab in the middle of them without apology, without guilt, and for no better reason than God told us we could. That's what it means to rest. To rest. So you need to rest on the seventh day. You know what I'm finding even now? I have to find moments of rest in my day daily. Moments where I just kind of plug away, right? That's what I do. Third thing, delight. Dorothy Sayers says this. She said, the most legalistic Sabbath keepers have added, thou shalt not work. They have added to the phrase, thou shalt not work, the phrase, thou shalt not play. This is what we do, right? So the Sabbath should be a fun day. Like it should be a day full of delight. Anna mentioned like she just thought the Sabbath was like you read and meditate and you sing all day. It actually should be a day of delight, right? So you get up, you start your day with pancakes or whatever, right? Put as much stuff on them as you want, chocolate chips, syrup, whipped cream, whatever you want to do, as much as you want to defile them as just go for it, right? You make a great pour over, kind of a single origin Ethiopian pour over, I would suggest, in a Chemex. Do you know what I mean? Early for lunch, like early lunch, you go get you a latte, with oat milk, do whatever, and maybe an extra shot. Maybe after, maybe post lunch, you go get another one. Do you know what I mean? We call this pleasure stacking. We just unapologetically stack up great things, right? You get to that evening, you open that bottle you've been just looking at all week. You know what I'm saying? Great IPA, whatever. Your thing, liqueur, whatever. This is what you do. You have a great meal on the Sabbath, just unapologetically. Like an apologetic to the world that this is the God that we serve, that this day is great. Like essentially you just want to try and make it like a holiday every Sabbath, right? Now, I do want to say on the front end, right? So my Sabbath, I start at 5:45 on Friday and go 5:45 to Saturday. That enables me to get some stuff done Friday morning, do whatever. And then when I get to Saturday night, just so you know, Sunday's coming, and so I need my Saturday night, right? While you guys are hanging out, doing whatever at the bar, I'm getting ready for this. You're welcome. Whatever, I know what you're doing, I see you in the streets while I'm working. All right, so, not angry. All right, so that's what I do. But I just want to say, I do want to reiterate this. Start where you are, not where you want to be. So even like in Anna's story, we were talking, I was like, so are you at a 24-hour now? She's like, yes, I do 24-hour now, but it didn't start there. So maybe for you, it's like 10 hours. You just do 10 hours. I'm going to take a 10-hour break. I'm going to do this. Like to God, I'm going to trust him with this 10 hours. I'm going to put my phone down, put the work down, put the schooling down, like 10 hours. That's where I'm going to start. Start where you are, not where you want to be, right? Better to start short of the goal than to not start at all. Just start where you are. And just make it an incredible day. We just do everything that you can, right? You're asking the question, is this activity that I'm participating, is it life-giving? What is it doing to me? Fourth thing, so it's stop, rest, delight, and worship. Andy Crouch says this, there's perhaps no single thing that could better help us recover Jesus' lordship in our frantic, power-hungry world than allow him to be the Lord of our rest as well as our work. Your Sabbath day should be a day of worship. It should be. Like ideally, I would say probably the best thing to do is like to start perhaps on like a Saturday evening and then roll into Sunday, right? And then have worship together in your community, and then it goes to whenever you want it to go to. That's probably ideally, right? That can't be for me because this is working for me. But it should be a day of worship for you as well. The weekend isn't a time to take off from God, right? I know some of you live that way. It's not. It's not actually a Sabbath given to you by a good God.